Recently, the situation on the front line in Ukraine and Russia has become deadlocked. While the Russian army has achieved successive breakthroughs in multiple war zones, on October 7, British media reported that Ukraine may give up some of its territory in exchange for the possibility of joining NATO or obtaining equivalent security guarantees. At the same time, Zelensky has repeatedly called on NATO allies to lift the restrictions on the supply of long-range weapons to Ukraine, claiming that this powerful decision is of crucial importance to Ukraine so far. What long-range weapons have Western allies provided to Ukraine? If the restrictions are lifted, which military hinterlands of Russia will be the first to be affected? On October 6, the Ukrainian army launched a ground attack in the GLSHK Overvysky district of Kursk, Oblast, Russia. But there has been no progress on the front line. The Russian Ministry of Defense previously stated that since the Ukrainian army entered Kursk nearly 2 months ago, the Ukrainian army has suffered losses of up to 18,560 soldiers. The opening of the Kursk front is a major strategic shift implemented by Ukraine to pin down the Russian military forces in the eastern Ukraine battlefield. According to U.S. media reports, at least 5 brigades of the Ukrainian army are operating in this direction. In addition, a large number of heavy equipment and weapons provided by NATO member states are also widely used on this front, including the American Stryker armored vehicles, Polish PT-91 tanks, British S-90 self-propelled howitzers, Italian M109L howitzers and Czech RM-70 rocket launchers. The lack of long-range weapons on the battlefield is one of the reasons for the slow progress of Ukraine in the Kursk direction. At the same time, in the eastern Ukraine region, the Ukrainian army also faces the same dilemma in tactics. According to Russian media reports, in September, the Russian army had approached the well-fortified eastern Ukraine fortress carefully managed by Ukraine, the Pokrovsk region known as the Red Army City. The Russian army has controlled multiple towns and villages around it. On October 5, according to the Ukrainian side, the Russian army has advanced to a position about 7 kilometers away from the Red Army City. Long-range weapons are extremely important weaponry in war, generally having a relatively long range and high accuracy, enabling the warring parties to effectively strike the enemy without having to approach dangerous areas. On the Ukraine-Russia battlefield, the long-range weapons mentioned by Ukraine usually refer to combat weapons with a range of about 200 to 300 kilometers. Zelensky declared, "We will continue to persuade our partners that Ukraine needs comprehensive long-range combat capabilities." Zelensky believes that lifting the restrictions on the use of long-range weapons is an effective way for Ukraine to reverse the difficult situation on the battlefield. According to Agence France Presse, Zelensky has been lobbying for months on the issue of lifting the restrictions on long-range weapons. Recently, he has frequently exerted pressure on the United States. During his visit to the United States in September, he even submitted the lifting of long-range weapon restrictions as a key part of the victory plan to the U.S. Congress among the many weapons provided to Ukraine. The long-range weapons that Zelensky most hopes to have the restrictions lifted on are the Storm Shadow CR-UISE missile jointly developed by Britain and France and the US-made Army Tactical Missile System ATACMS. Storm Shadow is an air-launched cruise missile that weighs 1.3 tons, is 5.1 meters long, and has a diameter of about 0.4 meters. Its 450-kilogram warhead is sufficient to destroy heavy fortifications, dubbed the Star Weapon. Storm Shadow is the most powerful missile that NATO has delivered to Ukraine so far. As early as May 2023, Britain and France had transported the Storm Shadow missile to Ukraine, but set a usage condition that Ukraine could not use it to strike the Russian mainland and could only fire the missile at targets within its own territory after the delivery was completed in May. In June, The storm shadow hit the Chongar highway bridge connecting Crimea and Kherson Oblast, forcing the Russian army to change its transportation routes. Another long-range weapon that Ukraine wants to have the restrictions lifted on is the U.S. Army Tactical Missile System, ATACMS. The United States also prohibits the Ukrainian army from using it to strike targets on the Russian mainland in September last year. The United States provided Ukraine with medium-range ATACMS with a range of less than 165 kilometers. But this does not meet Ukraine's needs. According to U.S. media reports, in February this year, Biden authorized the provision of long-range ATACMS with a range of 300 kilometers to Ukraine. And in April this weapon secretly arrived in Ukraine. The long-range ATACMS is also highly powerful and damaging on the Ukraine-Russia battlefield. According to U.S. media reports, on June 24th, the Ukrainian army used the HIMARS to launch approximately 10 Army Tactical Missile System, ATACMS. Only one of them was interfered with by the signal of the Russian S-500 air defense missile system and exploded in the air above the Crimea beach. At least 8 of the remaining 9 accurately hit the Russian long-range space communication center in Vitaino village in the Saki area of Crimea. Experts have analyzed in depth and pointed out that the ATACMS missile has an extremely astonishing speed of up to 3,700 kilometers per hour. And its powerful performance enables it to strike targets approximately 300 kilometers away. If this missile has the restrictions lifted, Ukraine will be able to fully tap its huge potential and launch attacks on the deep targets in the Russian mainland. This will undoubtedly pose a serious threat to Russia's strategic security, according to relevant reports by U.S. media. Recently, the Russian side is taking emergency actions to move its military aircraft outside the range of Ukraine's long-range missiles. This measure has triggered widespread attention and speculation. Does it mean that the lifting of restrictions on long-range weapons is imminent? This has become a focus of high concern in the international community. However, in the face of the potential threat of long-range weapons, Russia will clearly not sit idly by and will inevitably adopt a series of countermeasures. So, what countermeasures does Russia have exactly? In addition, people can't help but wonder which other long-range weapons may appear on the Ukraine-Russia battlefield in the future. It is worth mentioning that in addition to considering green-lighting the Storm Shadow cruise missile and ATACMS missile for Ukraine, according to the U.S. media The War Zone report, the U.S. military may also provide the AG-158 stealth air-launched cruise missile for Ukraine's F-16 fighter jets this fall. This missile has extremely powerful precision strike and stealth penetration capabilities and can easily penetrate the densest air defense network of the opponent. For this reason, it is called the long-range missile weapon that poses the greatest threat to Russia, compared with the Storm Shadow cruise missile provided by Britain and France. The AG-158 has a more advanced design, better stealth capabilities, and a longer range. Professional analysts have pointed out that if this missile is launched from a location near the border between northern Ukraine and Russia, it can strike military facilities as far as Voronezh Oblast and Bryansk Oblast in Russia. If it is launched near the southern front line, it can completely cover all Russian facilities in Crimea. Its potential threat is obvious. Recently, the Russian army has massively used glide-guided bombs to carry out large-scale airstrikes on the front positions and infrastructure of the Ukrainian army. In this round of airstrikes, places like Kharkiv in Ukraine have suffered unprecedentedly fierce bombings. This situation has also made Zelensky once again deeply realize the importance and urgency of obtaining long-range weapons, while strongly condemning this attack by the Russian army. The Ukrainian President Zelensky has once again demanded from the West long-range weapons with a range sufficient to counter the Russian side. In his view, the most effective and practical way to deal with the attacks of the Russian Army's glide-guided bombs. ECDI is to use long-range weapons to destroy the Russian military aircraft that can carry glide bombs. According to the report of the U.S. Institute for the Study of War, 245 Russian military targets, including 16 air bases, are within the range of Ukraine's ATACMS missiles. But currently, the Russian army has moved 90% of the military aircraft in the bases outside the range of long-range weapons to reduce potential risks. To temporarily replace the role of long-range weapons, Ukraine is currently using its own long-range drones on a large scale to strike deeper targets in Russia. In recent days, the Ukrainian army has repeatedly used drones to accurately hit important military targets, such as Russian ammunition depots and military factories recently. The former NATO Secretary General Stoltenberg and the defense ministers of many countries such as the Netherlands, Finland, and the Czech Republic have all called for the lifting of the ban on Ukrainian long-range weapons. The UK has indicated to the US that it hopes to allow Ukraine to use the Storm Shadow long-range missile to strike Russian military targets far from the Ukrainian border. However, the UK also hopes to obtain the clear consent of US President Biden to demonstrate the strategic coordination between the two countries. The calls from NATO allies for lifting the restrictions on long-range weapons for Ukraine are growing louder. Yet the US has shown a cautious attitude on the issue of lifting the ban. According to the Washington Post, the US is worried that the missiles falling into Russian territory will lead to an escalation of the conflict and exacerbate US-Russia confrontation. Facing the rising threat posed by the Ukrainian long-range missile system, Russia's response measures are also continuously upgrading. Experts analyze that in terms of comprehensive combat capabilities, the Russian army still holds advantages in terms of quantity, scale, and technology. Even if Ukraine ultimately obtains the permission to use long-range weapons, it will be difficult to change the pattern of the Russia-Ukraine war currently. There is still no clear timetable for the lifting of the ban on long-range weapons for Ukraine. Zelensky seems to have realized the drawbacks of relying on allies and is shifting his attention to developing its own long-range weapons. At the Ukrainian Defense Industry Forum on October 2nd, Zelensky emphasized that Ukraine can not only independently meet military needs, but also become a powerful participant in global weapons manufacturing.